Alright, all you glorious gamers out there, welcome to the PlayersToo Podcast, the video game podcast for gamers like you, by gamers like you. You can find PlayersToo on all the social media, that's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com, that's PlayerSToo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, it really helps us out. It does a huge amount for the exposure of the show, and while you're over there as well, if you could leave us a little review, again, it just helps us out even more. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. You're an absolute legend to us. Alright, and on with the show. My name is Mark Henderson. With me, as always, Mr. Lewis Camley. How's it going, Lewis?
Going very well, Mark. Good to see you again, as ever. Final day of work for the year today, so I'm in fairly good spirits already.
I have already finished work. It is glorious, Lewis.
Yes.
Christmas has begun officially. And hopefully I can get down to playing some video games and just dedicate like a whole bunch of time to that and not have to worry about anything. I can stay up late. It's not a school night anymore. Super good.
Well, yeah, and also we're always saying how Christmas is never actually a proper holiday, but this year, given
Christmas
that we
is not a holiday.
Can't do anything, maybe it will actually feel a bit more like a holiday for once.
We'll see. I'm not sure about that.
Man.
Anyway, Lewis, what have you been playing this week? I know you want to tell everyone about your platinum, so go ahead.
Yeah, technically not this week, I suppose, but yeah, since the last time that we updated each other on what we've been playing, I have got the platinum for Spider-Man Miles Morales on PS5. Platinum trophies not being something that I care about at all, really, normally speaking, but with this game, partly because I platinumed the original Spider-Man game, and partly just because the platinum was quite easy to obtain in the end, I just decided to go ahead and do it. But yeah, the last time I spoke about it, I had 2 missions to go. The last 2 missions are your typical end game missions, where it's basically boss rushes and wave of enemy stuff. So, you know, everything I had to say about that game has been said. It carries its story on well. It's great fun. It's just more Spider-Man, you know, with some nice little additions to the original PS4 game. The Platinum forces you to play a New Game Plus, which I didn't love having to do, to be honest. But not only play one, but finish one. You have to go through the entire story. But when you're able to skip cutscenes, it's only about 2.5 hours of gameplay, to be honest, if you're not doing any of the side content. So I just rattled through it, Mark, and got my Platinum down, basically.
Fair enough, man. I'm not sure I would have been dedicated enough to the game to do that. I mean, I've probably got more Platinum trophies than you, but to start a New Game Plus and go through the entire story again, I'm not sure I'd be willing to do that. I'll need to see when I eventually get around to playing it, which is hopefully next. Because I have now finished Demon's Souls as well, Lewis. Hurrah!
Oh, nice.
It was hard. It was really quite hard at points. There was some moments where grinding, I felt anyway, was necessary just to get my level up a bit to take on certain bosses and whatever. And I ended up being a little bit OP, I suppose, to the end of the game, which meant that later bosses were actually a little bit easy. But there was a real bit in the middle there when I was like, Jesus, this is really difficult. But overall, a really fantastic game, like really very, very good indeed. It's not as good as Bloodborne, definitely, I would say. But it's nonetheless very good and definitely worth your time if the Soulsborne games are your cup of tea, do you know what I mean? And this is one that you've not been able to play for a while because it was obviously a PS3 exclusive for a long period of time. So if this is just one of those games that you've never got around to because of that exclusivity, this is a really fantastic remake as well of what is a really very good game indeed. And it's just nice to see that, oh, this is where a lot of these things begun. You know what I mean? This is where Miyazaki got himself involved in the series, and particularly the level design is just fantastic, and you can totally see the through line between that and Bloodborne, and I'm sure along all the other Souls games as well. It's fantastic. It is some of the best level design I've ever seen. Often in games you don't think about level design a lot, and it's often because things these days are very open world. Exactly, but when you get a really well-designed, tight level, holy shit, it is something to behold when it's done right. Like, it really is. And yeah, all the combat, I mean, you know, if you've played any of these games, the combat is fantastic. There's a thing in the game called tendency, and there's a world tendency and your character tendency, and both of these things can vary between white and dark, which have various effects within the game world. I didn't mad love that, if I'm totally honest with you, because it just made things even more difficult and punished you even more for dying. because that's the thing in this game as well, is that it punished you so much more for dying, whereas in Bloodborne that was part of the learning, whereas this, it felt as though they were punishing that hard, like, oh, you failed, try again, and it's going to be even more difficult now, you know, which made it more difficult to learn. And when you did die, you end up in Souls form, which means that you have half health unless you wear a specific accessory item, in which case it's 3/4 health. And I spent the vast majority of the game using that accessory, basically pretending that 3/4 health was in actual fact my real health bar. And this fictitious full health bar was just a nonsense, and I didn't need to concern myself with that, basically. So I basically played the entire game almost in Souls form, because if you die when you're not in Souls form, then it affects world tendency, which can make things go pretty badly for you, it seems. It can also lock off certain characters in your run and things like that. It's not something that I love, but overall, I mean, that's a very small nitpick, I would say, in the game. I mean, it didn't affect my playthrough massively at all, but it's a really great game. I'd really recommend anyone play it, to be honest with you.
Nice one. I'm really glad you got through it, and what feels to me like at a fair clip, to be honest. I thought you'd be playing this for quite a while longer, but
man, I've pumped maybe about 45 to 50 hours into it, I would say. It definitely wasn't short,
No, fair enough. Yeah, it just feels like you've got through it faster in terms of like the days, but yeah, like in terms of its comparison to Bloodborne, are you putting Bloodborne still slightly ahead, do you think?
Bloodborne is a masterpiece as far as I'm concerned. Like, Bloodborne is one of the best games I've probably ever played. I actually find myself thinking about Bloodborne quite a lot, even still. Yeah. I don't have quite the same feelings about Demon Souls. However, that is not to say that it is not a good game. It is a very, very good game, and definitely worth your or anybody else's time. It is excellent. And also, what an unbelievable fucking remake. It is an incredible remake by Bluepoint as well. I've not even mentioned how good this game looks. It is stunning. And I think that things like the load times and all that, which I know were a bit of a hindrance on the PS3 generation, because you often have to change between worlds quite a lot, and if you die, then that's another loading screen, and obviously that happens pretty frequently. And all of that is just vanished because of how fast the PlayStation 5 is on these new generation of consoles. So I think that the actual playing experience of the game has just been massively improved, just in the remake itself, and because of the new shiny hardware, you know. It's just a better playing experience. I'm glad that I've played it in its current form than if I went back and played an old PS3 version of it, you know?
Yeah, definitely. It seems like it's really been worth waiting for that remake and getting stuck into it at that point. I still think that I'll give it a bash at some point, but I
think you should, man. I really think that you should.
I'm going to prioritise Bloodborne first. I actually have installed Bloodborne on my PS5 now.
Ooh, that's a big step. That's a big step.
So after the challenge from last week for Game Award Challenge, I just thought, well, it's there in the PS Plus collection. I'll just install it so that I can jump in at any point the mood takes me. I actually spent a bit of time watching a YouTube video of the first hour or so of the game. I was kind of skipping through it, but it's the bit that I have played before with you, and I was just kind of trying to see how much of it came back to my memory, and so much of it is familiar, and that both made me think like, oh, I'm actually quite excited for this, and also really sort of terrified and dreading it.
that pretty much sums up the entire feeling of playing Bloodborne. It's very exciting, but also terrifying much of the time.
Nice one. Well, I just have one quick last game to mention, because I surprised myself by buying a game from the PlayStation end of year sale the other day, just on a whim, and I mentioned this on our social media the other day, but they were selling Uncharted The Lost Legacy for just £7.99 mark, and I thought, well, I kind of have had an interest in playing that, and I decided just to go for it and installed it just a couple of days ago, and I have now beaten that game. It is a remarkably quite short game. Like, I'm not going to labour the point about this because it's basically just more Uncharted, but it is really nice to see how Naughty Dog developed on what Uncharted 4 was doing, but you can really see the beginnings of a lot of the mechanics that appear in The Last of Us Part 2 start to take shape here, and that to me is just a really fascinating piece of kind of game development history that you can physically play. You know, things like the two female characters travelling together. There's scenes that are very reminiscent of the arrival in Seattle from The Last of Us Part 2, and just lots of little gameplay things, like, you know, the introduction of the rope that you saw in The Last of Us Part 2 is here. There's a lot of interesting interplay between a slightly more open world and then linear gameplay and narrative, which again, it just feels like Naughty Dog were trying out a lot of things in Lost Legacy, it's quite unpolished. There are bits that are slightly broken, to be honest, like the way that some of the traversal works, the way that some of the combat works is a mess at times, I'll be totally honest. But overall, like, it's a really good, fun 8-hour long thrill ride in your typical Uncharted way. There's a lot of jumping over stuff, there's a lot of falling through roofs all of a sudden, there's a lot of surprise interruptions from bad guys, train chases, all of that good stuff that if you've enjoyed any Uncharted games, this is definitely worth checking out, particularly if it's still on sale. It looks really good on PS5. I don't know if it's had any improvements or if that's just the natural boost that the PS5 can give it. And what you just mentioned there about the load times, just cutting away some of that, not that it was ever too bad in Uncharted, but the fact that you can just jump in and get a wee bit of progress done still, to me, is fantastic on PS5. But mainly the reason I picked this up, Mark, was because of Miles Morales. And there's just something about that shorter kind of half step between games in a bigger franchise that I think is really interesting, and I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of, particularly from Sony Studios over the next few years. And it just felt like we're starting to use Lost Legacy as a byword for a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, the sort of shorter in-between game based on the bigger AAA game, yeah.
Exactly,
definitely.
yeah, like the not quite a sequel but sort of continuing the story thing. Like, it feels like a lot of that has spun out from Uncharted Lost Legacy, and I thought, well, I should play that because I did like that series a lot, and if it is going to be the start of something, why not kind of get in on the ground? So glad to have played it, knocked it out in about 8 hours. Good fun. I think that's all there is to say about it, really.
Nice one, man. Well, I can tell you that the offer on PlayStation Store ends today, but Mark has just clicked to add it to his basket, and we will be going through the purchasing process in but a moment.
Very nice.
So there we go. Anyway, Lewis, on with the show, and this week we're doing something slightly different. Alright, Lewis, this week we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be doing a look back at gaming in 2020. Now, the reason for this isn't just because the news has been very slim pickings, Lewis. It's been very slim pickings indeed. But because I think that it's good to have a bit of perspective on the year, do you know what I mean? And there's no better time to do this. Obviously, Christmas is a totally arbitrary time, but it seems like a nice time to do something like this. Do you know what I mean? It's New Year's resolutions. It's all that rubbish, you know? I think that it's just good to have a bit of perspective on this year, particularly because of the mad year that we've all had.
Yeah, it's good to get 2020 wrapped up and dealt with nice and early because it's been an absolute stinker
absolutely.
in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. Dearie me. All right, Lewis, the first thing that I really want to talk about is two games, really. Two games that were not ready to come out this year, one that was delayed until next year, and one that came out anyway. The games I'm, of course, referring to are Cyberpunk 2077, which has been all of the news, basically, in gaming over the past few weeks. We know that the reviews of this game were done only on PC. Then when the game came to console, it was an absolute car crash, particularly on the last gen consoles. It has been absolutely abysmal. It is, quite frankly, not fit for purpose on those consoles. Even on the current gen consoles, the game crashes, there are glitches. It's bad. It's real bad. If you've not heard about this, I don't know where you've been, because this has been all over the place. This has been on national news.
Yeah,
you know,
made the BBC 6 o'clock news. Crazy.
There you go. There you go. I can't remember a launch of any piece of media at all that was so hyped and has come crashing down so hard. Even Anthem, like I remember Anthem, people were going nuts for that, and that came out and it was a disaster. But I think people were like, oh well, what were you expecting from EA? And I wasn't expecting the world from that game. But Cyberpunk 2077 was supposed to be like a new benchmark in video games, and it has came out and it is embarrassing, quite frankly. It is embarrassing for the studio, and quite frankly could have irreparably damaged the reputation of a studio that had one of the best in video games. You know what I mean? It was such a well-respected studio. Everybody loved CDPR, and then this has just been a car crash of a launch. Secondly, Halo Infinite, which was a game that also wasn't ready to come out this year when it was supposed to be coming out. It was supposed to be coming out concurrently with the launch of the Xbox Series X, the next-gen consoles. And Microsoft, instead of putting that game out in a half-arsed fashion, have decided to delay it. And I think, having seen what has become of Cyberpunk 2077, I could not think that that was a better decision for Xbox now. I know that at the time we were discussing it about the fact that, oh well, people would have been expecting to get this game when they were putting in pre-orders for their Xbox Series X and things like that. Master Chief was still slapped all over the boxes and whatever. But in reality, for the good of that game and for the good of Halo fans and people who want to love that game, I think that is definitely the best decision that they could have possibly have made for that game. So that, I suppose, is two of the bigger, more recent headlines from gaming in 2020, Lewis. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, starting with Cyberpunk, I mean, there almost couldn't be a more fitting end to this year, both the kind of year it's been for everyone generally and also the year in video games, than this kind of catastrophic launch that this game had. People
are having to refund this game on base consoles, and if you bought this game on a base console, you should seek a refund. If you're listening to this, anyone out there who has got this game on a base console, you should seek a refund. And then if you want to buy it when it's in a fit state, which by all accounts seems to be February at the absolute earliest, then you can maybe reconsider buying it. But this game does not work on the base consoles. It does not work.
Fundamentally, it doesn't. And that's where the damage to reputation is going to come in first and foremost, because it seems like a decision was taken by CDPR to hide the state of that game on base consoles from last generation, which is just not on in any field at all. It's really not good.
There also has been a bit of a revolt at CDPR as well, where the devs have been trying to hold management accountable, both over crunch, both over the disastrous launch and the state of the game. And rightfully so. These people have a right to be angry because they had bonuses originally that were tied to the Metacritic score, which isn't actually that uncommon in video games, but that was subsequently changed because I think that they knew that the game was not going to review very well at all. But man, it has been a car crash of a launch. I cannot remember anything like this in video games or any media at all. No. I can't remember anything like this.
The moment that it was pulled from the PlayStation Store...
It's been pulled from the PlayStation Store. That is wild.
It was the most incredible thing, yeah. It happened at like midnight at our time, the night that it happened, and I just saw it before I was heading to bed, and was just like completely gobsmacked that this had come to pass for this game that, I mean, it's not only one of the most anticipated games of this year, but of the last decade, really. It has been a growing hype machine, and this year, obviously, with the several delays that it's had, that we were talking on the final delay that it had to December 10th, I remember when we were talking about that, we were kind of going, is the shine coming off of this slightly? And I think we only meant that insofar as, are people going to be getting a bit frustrated and a little bit nervous about it? You could not have imagined any of this was coming whatsoever.
God, no.
Yeah, and to be fair, like, it still sounds like it's a pretty solid, really good game at its foundation. You know, if you can actually get it playing and working well, the world design, the missions, the story, the various kind of RPG elements that you can explore and expand on. There sounds like a lot of good game there, and people are still saying that. But I mean, I certainly am not going to play it until it's sorted out, and maybe that's February, maybe it's later. I suspect a lot of people are going to be feeling that way now. Do you think you'll still play it? Yeah,
I think that I will still play it at some point if it hasn't been tainted to the point where I really just don't want to even think about it. But that time will be far from now. That time will be when I am comfortable buying a game that will work properly on my console, which isn't even a last gen console. Like, I'm fortunate enough to have a PlayStation 5, and I'm not even confident that it'll work correctly on that. Never mind the base consoles. And I don't think that time will come until February, March, maybe later, maybe the summer next year, genuinely. It might be that much of a delay, because what I was planning on doing was finishing Demon's Souls, which I was a little bit like, this was maybe a bit daft for me. I've started this, it's going to run into Cyberpunk, I'm going to really, really want to play that. Super glad I started Demon's Souls, because I didn't even have to think about Cyberpunk 2077 or pre-ordering it or anything like that, which I nearly did on numerous occasions. And if this game had arrived in that state, I would have been exceptionally pissed off. So I completely understand why people are annoyed about this. It's awful, Lewis. It's awful. It's one of the worst launches of any media I can ever remember. I know I keep saying that, but I'm blown away by how bad this has been.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, for me, it is worse than the Anthem launch. It's way worse than the Anthem launch. The
Anthem launch was so bad as well. It was so bad.
Yeah, it just, because of what was expected of it, and because particularly of the way that the publishers have handled the rollout and the messaging around it, it's just, a total mess. And to go back to your original point, I think that as dramatic a moment as the delay of Halo Infinite was for Xbox and for the whole next generation launch, I mean, at that moment it felt colossal that they had done that.
It really did, yeah.
I suspect that game could have still come out at launch and it would have done okay. It just would never have lived up to what Halo is supposed to be. I don't get the sense that it had even the kind of level of bugs and stuff that Cyberpunk has launched with, because what we saw of it just didn't look great. It didn't look like it was falling to bits in the way that Cyberpunk is.
Well, interestingly, what we saw of Cyberpunk looked amazing.
That's true.
In terms of gameplay. CDPR have just totally pulled a fast one on this. Like, I really think that their handling of this entire situation is beyond irresponsible. Really, I really, really do.
Absolutely. And I think that's such a key point to make, Mark, because we're talking about Halo Infinite, and also we were talking a bit off air the other day about The Last of Us Part 2 and how that game at one point this year, for different reasons absolutely, but was given an indefinite delay by Sony, and the same step to be taken by Microsoft, which was to delay Halo Infinite at that point indefinitely.
Yeah, we now know it's supposed to be coming out in the fall of 2021.
So effectively a year's delay they've put on that.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Both of those are decisions taken by publishers that are mature in the world that they are in. You know, both of those companies have been doing this for a long time. And particularly in the case of Sony with The Last of Us delay earlier in the year, which was only, if you remember rightly, it was only to do with how they wanted to launch the game and how they could supply it to people at the same time because of the pandemic and the effect it was having on shipping and all that sort of stuff.
I think there was just a high level of uncertainty at that particular moment.
Exactly,
as well.
yeah. I mean, it was early doors for the pandemic, but they came out and they said the state of this game at launch and how players experience it is the most important thing, and we don't care about how bad a delay might look. To me, that is the lesson that CDPR have to take away from this year, is that they ultimately, as publishers and developers, have a responsibility to the people buying the game, the people paying money for it, but also just the people playing it and the experience that they're supposed to be having. And it feels to me, and it looks like to everyone now, it looks like they just wanted to push that game out the door to start raking in the money. After years of saying things like, we'll release this game when it's ready, and that's exactly what they didn't do.
Yeah. Unbelievably, they managed to make their money back in a weekend, was it? They recouped their dev costs in a weekend, CDPR, through pre-orders, exactly. And I genuinely hope that everyone who bought that on a base console returns it. Like, I really, really do. It's been awful. It's been awful to watch. Everything about it has been absolutely awful. Lewis, it's currently sitting at a 56 on Metacritic right now. That's for Xbox, and it's sitting at a 55 on the PS4. IGN gave this a 4 out of 10, Lewis. Yeah. A game like that, I wouldn't even know about. Like, I don't know about games that are 5 out of 10. Do you know what I mean? Those games are few and far between. Usually publishers wouldn't even bother reviewing a game that was that low down the list. It is crazy. It is absolutely crazy that they launched the game in that state. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing for the studio, and it's absolutely horrible for the people that have bought this game and have been looking forward to it for so long. Yeah,
100%, yeah.
Anyway, Lewis, moving on to something slightly more cheery. Well, as cheery as 2020 gets, anyway. This has been a bad year. There's been a global pandemic. I think that saying that this is a bad year is a bit of an understatement. However, listen, there's 3 games that I just wanted to make sure that we mentioned when we were talking about 2020, particularly in the context of the global pandemic. And those 3 games are Animal Crossing, Among Us, and Fall Guys. I've not played any of these games, it should be pointed out. I know that you've played Fall Guys, but I don't think you've played the other 2. You've not played Among Us, have you?
Not yet, no. We've got a sort of vague plan for a game soon, though, which will be great. But
Nice one. I'm so glad that these games exist. And in 2020 of all years, I really think that video games have brought people together in a really incredible way. And I think that these 3 games are bastions of how to do it and how to do it well. Do you know what I mean? All these games came out, they had massive communities, they were whimsical and light-hearted and fucking fun. Do you know what I mean? They were just good goddamn fun from top to bottom, you know? And it was just something great that you could do with your friends when a lot of us were stuck inside and unable to go outside. And honestly, I just think that it speaks to the power of video games and interactive experiences, and as a way to talk to people and connect to people, even though we're not sitting in the same room as one another, you know?
Absolutely, and I'm glad that you brought these games up, because we don't play a lot of multiplayer games anymore, and so like you say, we haven't really got around to these too much. And I think that's partly that because games bring us together to do this, and we talk a lot about the non-multiplayer games that we play. That's probably why. But for this year in particular, to think back to like just before Animal Crossing came out and before the pandemic began, no one was really talking about that game in the way, I mean, some people were, and obviously it has a big fan base anyway, but nothing like what it has achieved. And that just really set the tone for some of these big multiplayer games to steal the limelight, and in the case of Among Us, to completely resurrect itself, basically. That game is a couple of years old and it's now an award winner this year, which is just insane for such a small team and such a small game. But like you say, man, it's just a way for people to have come together, to have just had some light moments. I mean, I go back to Animal Crossing in particular, that at that point, back in sort of March, April, when all of this was still completely baffling and bewildering and we didn't really know what was going to happen, not that it was a game that either of us were playing, but it was just a game that was letting so many people just do really small, simple things together and just be a little bit creative together and stuff like that. And it just felt so necessary back then. There are plenty of other games, obviously Battle Royales have had another big year, and the classic multiplayer games that are always big have been a part of this. But for those 3 games in particular, man, what a year.
Absolutely, man. I've never been so happy for 3 games to exist that I've never played and will probably never play. Anyway, Lewis, let's move on to some of our favourite games, or just gaming moments, I suppose, from 2020. What are your thoughts?
Well, I wanted to ask you first, actually, just overall what your take on 2020 has been like. Do you think it's been a good year, a bad year for games? Maybe thinking beyond just the pandemic impact, I suppose.
Well, I always remember last year, the general chat was that 2019 was a bit of a down year for video games and that 2020 would be an absolute colossus, would be unbelievable. I'm not really sure that 2020 has lived up to the hype, quite frankly, in terms of that, and in terms of video games. And I don't know if that is because of the delay of Halo Infinite in particular, and the fact that we're now in a situation where we know that Cyberpunk is not the game we all thought it was going to be. I don't know if that's why I don't feel as excited about 2020, or maybe it's just because it's been a shit year overall. It could be that, but in reality, Lewis, there has been some absolutely cracking games this year. I mean, Animal Crossing by itself, Among Us, Fall Guys, like I'm definitely including all them, Final Fantasy VII Remake, The Last of Us Part 2, Ghost of Tsushima, Doom Eternal, even like Demon Souls and Spider-Man Miles Morales. There's been a load of great games that have come out this year, and I don't know if it's just because 2020 is beating me down so much, but even then, I still don't think about it in terms of like 2018, you know what I mean, was like amazing. That was like one of the greatest years in video games that I can ever remember, and I thought that 2020 was going to be like that, but unfortunately I think because of the global situation right now, it's not quite lived up to that. And it just shows that these things affect your mental state in all aspects of life. Do you know what I mean? These terrible things are going on in the world, and there's been even more terrible things that have went on in the world this year than the pandemic, although that's definitely been the big one. Yeah, I don't know. I struggle to get excited about 2020 and gaming, List, to be completely honest with you.
I think I'm kind of in alignment with that, to be honest. To me, it feels like there's a small handful, really, of brilliant, really incredible games, and then quite a lot of games that were pretty good or that I was maybe expecting a little more from, and plenty of games that were either delayed entirely because of the pandemic or other issues, or that just came out and kind of didn't really live up to what we were expecting of them. So one of the games that I mentioned back at the start of the year when we did a bit of a look forward to the year ahead was Empire of Sin, for example, as a game I had been really looking forward to, which when it came out has kind of missed its mark, really. We had things like the Mafia trilogy remaster, which came out and just didn't really do very much. Dreams was a big game for me at the start of the year that I really wanted to support, and not that reviewed badly or anything, but it just... They didn't really have the launch plan that we had both spoken about that would be really good, a free-to-play model or some way to pack it in with the new consoles or any of that stuff. It just felt like a game that has been sort of abandoned slightly. And so to me, that's the narrative of the year slightly, is that there are some standout games, and we'll talk about some in just a wee second, but also a lot of kind of near misses and kind of disappointments that for games that are probably fine to play but just didn't really live up to what we were hoping for,
I would definitely put Watch Dogs Legion in that category as well. Like, I was expecting big things from that game, and ultimately it came out and it was alright. It was perfectly fine, but nothing particularly special, I think to call 2020 the year of disappointments, Lewis, is a bit of an understatement.
Well, one game that didn't disappoint me at all, and let's jump in here then, was The Last of Us Part 2. And
yes,
we have spoken about this game at length, and obviously last week just with the Game Awards we've been talking about it a lot. I think it's fair to say it's both of our favourite game of the year, basically.
Oh yeah, I mean for me it's pretty comfortable, to be honest, that is the best game of the year.
Yeah. I wanted to reflect back on, because you mentioned gaming moments there, and for me, I played the entirety of The Last of Us Part 1 and Left Behind the DLC, and then went straight into The Last of Us Part 2 back in June at launch. And so to me, one of the biggest gaming moments, quote unquote, in 2020 was just that 4-week or whatever it was, total immersion in the world of The Last of Us, which obviously culminated with this fucking incredible second game. And to me, that will be the standout of 2020, hands down, was just pushing through both of those games, finding it completely narratively remarkable. I mean, there was so much nonsense around those games as well, but for me, just absolutely a brilliant experience to play them both in quick succession like that. Yeah, man, I love that, I've got to say. I done a similar thing over a longer space of time. Obviously, I played The Last of Us Part 1 for the very first time back in January this year in a pre-pandemic world. What a time we lived in back then. Then subsequently played Left Behind as well shortly after that, and then The Last of Us Part 2 when it came out later in the year. But for you to have done that all the way through, back to back to back, that's great. Honestly, I would have loved to have done that. I am so glad that I did it the way that I did it, quite frankly. I'm so glad that I got to play The Last of Us Part 1 and Left Behind so close to The Last of Us Part 2, but the way that you did it would have been even better. It's like binging a TV series, isn't it? You just did it all at one time. Yeah. But Mark, you said there that it was hands down or fairly comfortably your favourite game of the year, but I want to mention one other game to you which you've already kind of briefly touched on, which is Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Yes.
Are you putting that as your second best game of the year, basically? Because to me, that felt to me like it was bound to be your favourite game given your historic nostalgia for the original. Oh, God save me, I do love Final Fantasy VII, the original Final Fantasy VII. But the remake is one of the best remade games ever, I would say. In fact, it probably is the best remade game ever in terms of a remake, and I say that coming off the back of Demon's Souls, which is obviously a remake in and of itself, but that is a true remake, if you want to put it that way. Demon's Souls was just, you have this incredible game there, make it look better, make it more accessible in 2020. By accessible, I mean don't make it look shit, don't make it look like PS3 graphics, do you know what I mean? Make people see this as a new game in 2020 even though it's a remake. Whereas Final Fantasy VII Remake was a total reimagining of the Final Fantasy VII story. The story is still there, but the way that you experience that story is totally different. Totally different. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I loved it so much. It was incredibly nostalgic for me to play through as well. But not just that. It didn't just play on the nostalgia. The game was absolutely brilliant in and of itself. The combat system was fucking revolutionary as far as I'm concerned. And if more games don't come out with a combat system similar to Final Fantasy VII Remake, including other Final Fantasy games, I will be very, very shocked, because it was so good. I loved it. Yeah, that is easily my second favourite game of the year. I would say that The Last of Us is comfortably number one. Final Fantasy VII Remake is, for me anyway, is pretty comfortably number two, honestly. Nice, yeah. I'm still really looking forward to playing it. I might well make it one of my kind of winter break games, because it just feels like there's enough time there, basically, to... Lewis, you absolutely should. You will not regret it. Even if you don't respond to the story at all, which I don't believe that you won't. No. But even if you didn't, the combat in and of itself is enough to carry this game. It's fucking great fun to play. That's so interesting, because it's always the combat that comes back to my mind as being the thing that I'm like, oh God, am I not going to enjoy that? So I think, I basically just need to invest some time in it, play it for at least 10 hours, and if I'm not hooked, fair enough. But I really think that I'm going to enjoy it. I really remember liking the demo. It was actually this time last year that I started playing the original for the very first time, and so there's something there. I just want to get back into that world, want to see how they've treated it, because it was one of the only other really massive games this year that deserves its place in that kind of game of the year category. It just feels like an important one to play, Absolutely, man, absolutely. Well, what about for you then, Lewis? I mean, obviously, your game of the year as well is The Last of Us Part 2. I don't think we need to harp on about how much we love The Last of Us Part 2 anymore. But what would come in second for you then? I knew you were going to ask me that back, and I never actually thought of a good answer for it, because I think for me, for a start this year, I've played a lot of older games, and often the best games that I've played this year, like Hollow Knight, for example, just to pluck one out, or older games. Of the games that actually dropped this year, I mean, there's a strong shout for it being Ghost of Tsushima, probably, because, you know, it's really accomplished from start to finish. I don't think it really was groundbreaking in any way, but it was glorious and good fun and had a great combat system. And
it was extremely well executed.
Exactly.
I agree. I don't think that it's groundbreaking in any capacity, really, but in what it was trying to do, it done it very, very well. It had a fantastic combat system as well. Told a very, very good story, and it looked fucking beautiful while it was doing it, quite frankly.
Yeah, exactly that. And there's a couple of other games that I think are basically on par with that kind of description, almost, even down to how beautiful they were, which would be Spider-Man Miles Morales, and also Ori and the Will of the Wisps, which I played earlier.
Oh, yeah, man, yeah.
And which I think has kind of gone a bit under the radar for people this year, just because there have been a couple of other massive games. You know, Ori, for me, was really fantastic. One of the first games in that style that I'd played in kind of recent years, sort of was treating it as a bit of a demo for going back to Hollow Knight properly this year, and so those stand out as really accomplished games. Again, none of them really pushing the medium in any big, huge, important way, but just really well executed, good looking games. Honestly, one of the games for me, I still would put it up there near the top of my personal list, and definitely not one that reviewed as well as others, is XCOM Chimera Squad. That game is still stuck in my head as just being like, I guess it did come about during lockdown, and I think it was when I was furloughed, and I just had a lot of time for it, and it had that methodical gameplay that I think was particularly good for my head back then. It was buggy as all hell, reviewed kind of middling, but for me that was just one of the standouts this year. Is there any game like that for you that you played this year that you maybe weren't expecting to love as much as you did?
The one game, I suppose, to me that stands out as a game that I loved way more than I thought I would, or maybe even more than the game really deserves, was Astro's Playroom.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God, Lewis, I was overjoyed with everything. It was a game that played extremely strongly on my nostalgia, but God save me, man, I was overjoyed playing that. And it was a tech demo, Lewis. It was a tech demo, and I absolutely fell in love with it. You know, that's one of the ones that sort of stood out to me as being one that really surprised me, because basically I was going into that thinking that, oh, it's just a daft wee game that shows off how the controller works, you know. But in actual fact, in playing through that, I thought, I am absolutely fucking loving this. And I really hope that they take Astro and give him a proper full-length platformer, because they could make something really special out of that game. They really could.
Totally agree with that, yeah. As much as we keep referring to it as this kind of tech demo, there's so much.
It's a tech demo, but there's so much in it. It's crazy.
Yeah, honestly, if anyone's sitting there with a PS5 just now and hasn't played it yet, particularly if you've not played it because you think, oh, it's a bit of a kid's game or something, you know, if you're,
it doesn't matter.
you yourself are a bit younger and you're trying to only play cool games, ignore all that, because particularly if you've got any connection to the history of PlayStation, even if it's only PS3 and 4 that you had because you're a bit younger or whatever, there's so much there to love. And it is good fun to play. Even if you've got no connection to PlayStation, it's a decently made little platformer.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Lewis, I'm going to ask you the opposite question. Is there a game that you've played this year that didn't live up to your expectations?
There's always one, isn't there? I think the one that released this year that really stands out to me, and not that it wasn't still a good game, and I remember we tried to labour this point when we both played it, but the one that stands out is Resident Evil 3 Remake to me.
Could not agree more.
Is that the one for you as well? Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. I wanted to love it so much more than I could.
Yeah. I think that's a really strong way of putting it, actually, because coming off of Resident Evil 2 Remake, which I think was for both of us was one of our favourite games last year.
Oh, yeah. I think that my favourite game last year was probably Control. And then after that, almost certainly Resident Evil 2. Like, I would genuinely put that above Death Stranding. Like, I thought that it was an incredible remake, which really set the bar then, which is incredible to think that only a year has passed from us getting Demon Souls in the Final Fantasy VII remake. You know, the remake game is moving quickly, Liz.
Yeah, it's incredible what they are able to achieve just now, but in this case, it was just a bit of a letdown. I thought it just never really pushed what that game could have been. I don't think, particularly around Nemesis. You know, it wasn't as good as Mr. X was in Resident Evil 2.
Oh, not even close, was it? The game in and of itself, I think, was pulling from a source game. Like the original Resident Evil 3 wasn't as good as Resident Evil 2. Like Resident Evil 2 was a groundbreaking game when it first came out, you know. And I don't think Resident Evil 3 ever really lived up to that in the first place, and I think that the same unfortunately goes for the remakes. Another one for me that I also just mentioned was Watch Dogs. I was expecting big things from this game because they told me to expect big things from this game. But in reality, I don't think that the game really lived up to the hype, particularly in this recruit everyone system. Then everyone was going to have their own origin mission and all that and blah, 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 blah. And really, you saw the wheels turning behind that pretty bloody quickly in reality. The game was fine. The game was absolutely fine. There was nothing really wrong with it, but I was looking for something that was going to be, like we said, groundbreaking, and in reality it wasn't even close to that, to be honest.
Yeah, I found myself noticing it in a deal the other day and just had your voice come into my head with that same sort of it's fine, and I just was like, I don't want to spend any money on it just to try it, you know. And that's a real shame because that game felt like one that would be worth just trying, even if you're not going to play the whole thing.
Yeah. I would say, honestly, if you want to try it just to try it, then fine. I mean, it is what it is. But if you're on the fence about it, there's better things to play. Genuinely, there is. There really, really is. I can't punt for it too hard here. I really can't.
There's one other game that we played this year that didn't release this year, I don't think, that I was going to think of for you as one of your least enjoyed games that you've played.
Oh, yeah.
Which was our very first play-along game of this year, Ape Out, which I remember you didn't... I don't think you hated it, but you just didn't really enjoy it.
No, I didn't hate it. I didn't hate it at all. I don't want that to be out there. I did not hate Ape Out at all. I thought a lot of what Ape Out was doing was very, very interesting. Also, this game definitely did not come out this year. But of the games that I played this year, yeah, that one, it was more of an art piece, you know, and less of a video game. And I think at the time I was wanting a wee bit more of a video game. In terms of what the game was doing, in terms of its score and the way the music responded to what was happening in the game, and the art style of the game as well, which is fucking drop dead gorgeous. Like, it looks incredible. I really enjoyed those aspects of the game, but overall I was wanting a wee bit more from the gameplay. I think that's basically what it came down to. It was sort of the same thing again and again and again, and although your enemies changed a little bit through the game, it didn't massively change throughout the playtime, you know. And not that there was a long game, but even in that time I felt as though, it's the same thing again. You know?
I mean, I really liked a lot about it, and most of the things that you've kind of highlighted there anyway, but for me it was a solid little fun arcadey game. I was really kind of raising that though because it was the first in what I think was an absolutely stellar line of play-along games for us, and I just wanted to spend a little bit of time going through some of those and picking your brains on which ones you thought were your favourites.
Lewis, I would absolutely love to do this because I thought that our play-along games for this year have been fucking incredible, and I don't think that I had played a single play-along game this year before we decided to play it as part of the podcast. Yeah. So these were all brand new games to me, and I am delighted that we have had this as part of our show because it has exposed me to some amazing, amazing games. And if you are not playing along with us, or you are not playing these games, or you haven't played these games before, God save me, man. Like, do yourself a favour. These are some of the best indie games I've ever played in my life. And I played the vast majority of them this year. It's been great.
Yeah, we've picked 12 games over the year. Obviously, Return of the Obra Dinn is our current one, so we won't say too much about that.
Which I'm starting either today or tomorrow, I think.
We'll see. But yeah, some crackers there. So I'll just run through the list quickly. We played Ape Out first, then in February Kentucky Route Zero, then Her Story, then Telling Lies, both of those from Sam Barlow, Thomas Was Alone, and then Volume from Mike Bithell, Bastion and then Transistor from Supergiant, who have obviously had an absolutely incredible year with Hades.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gone Home and Tacoma from Fulbright, who we just saw in their next amazing looking game showcased at the Game Awards.
Yep.
And then Papers, Please and Return of the Obra Dinn from Lucas Pope. Some crackers there, Mark. Some of them I had played before, but some of them have shot up my list in terms of favourite games of the year and ever.
Well, I know what one you're going to say that you love, Lewis, and it's Kentucky Route Zero, isn't it?
I mean, it probably does still stand as my favourite on that list because I just found it so stunningly moving, so unlike anything I was playing around it. just as something that had built over 7 years of releases, 5 episodes, and those little inter-episode sort of shorter snippets, just incredible, Mark. I could play it again and again.
Some of them were amazing. Some of them were better than the actual game.
100%, yeah. I played it twice in its entirety this year alone. I can see myself playing it more often than that. I don't often replay games, so that is a high praise from me.
I must admit, Lewis, I think at the time I was coming down a little bit negative on it, but a lot of that was devil's advocate a little bit because it's not a very traditional video game, is it? It's a lot like reading a novel at some points. But Lewis, I'm not going to lie to you, I find myself thinking about Kentucky Route Zero, as I was just mentioning about Bloodborne.
Nice.
I find myself thinking about Kentucky Route Zero like a lot. I would love to go back and play it again, I've got to admit, but I would have to say that my favourite from this list, oh man, it's actually difficult to choose. I was going to say that with such confidence, and then I'm already taking them back. But I really, really, really loved Thomas Was Alone. Like, I really loved that.
Wow.
I loved Bastion as well, and I absolutely loved Papers, Please, which we only done last month. I really, really loved those games. We've been doing these games in sort of pairs recently, just so that we could talk a little bit about the developers as well, do you know what I mean? And just so you can speak about that over 2 games and how maybe their development style has changed and things like that. But we played Bastion basically because I wanted to play Transistor. Then we played Papers, Please basically because I wanted to play Return of the Obra Dinn. And we played Thomas Was Alone basically because I wanted to play Volume. And it turned out all those games that we had to, quotes, had to play to get to the game that I actually wanted to play turned out to be my favourites of not only the year or of those 2 games or whatever, but I've actually turned into some of my favourite indie games ever, you know? Like, I love Thomas Was Alone. Again, I find myself thinking about Thomas Was Alone a weird amount. I think that the beautiful simplicity of that game, man, was just incredible. Bastion is one of the tightest games I think I've ever played in my life. There is absolutely no fat on that game at all. I think Transistor is pretty much the same, and by all accounts, so is Hades, which has been nominated for numerous Game of the Year awards and has won quite a few of them, and I think probably deservedly. Papers, Please, again, in particular, was just one that jumps off the page there to me as doing something so incredibly interesting with very minimal gameplay, effectively, but that gameplay in and of itself ties in so incredibly to what is happening in the narrative. It was an incredible piece of video game development, quite frankly. Man, we played some good games, Lewis. We played some good games this year.
We really did. I mean, yeah, all the ones that you highlighted there were astonishing in their own ways. Her Story as well was one that had been on my list.
Man, I've not even mentioned Her Story.
Yeah.
My God, it's been so good.
Similarly, like Gone Home for me was a game that I'd kind of been meaning to get round to, and doing the play along, as we've said a few times, is the kick up the arse that you sort of needed to get onto some of these indie games and to prioritise them over big massive releases. But I just want to mention Bastion again, Mark, because that was not a game that I was even, you know, I knew it existed and stuff, but I didn't know too much about it. It was not on any of my lists of games to play. And the experience of playing that, you're spot on when you say there's no fat on that game, man. It is lean and healthy as a game could be. And honestly, that alone, like, it made me want to play Transistor. It is still to this day making me go, do I play Pyre before I play Hades? Because I just want to see that studio's progression from game 1 to game 4, because so far they've just not put a foot wrong. And for you to have put that on our list for this year, because it certainly wasn't a pick of mine, I'm so glad that we played it.
Well, I'm glad, man. I'm really glad about that. All right, Lewis. Well, as we are about to wrap up here, do you have any final thoughts on all of the games that you played this year, whether it be 2020 releases or otherwise?
Yeah, I think for me, as I said earlier, this year's going to stand out as a year that had a lot of really excellent games and then a lot that fell short. But for me personally, I've just played some phenomenal games this year, and partly helped by the pandemic situation and having a bit more time for games and stuff like that, including some of the ones we've just ran through as a list there. But adding into that, games like The Outer Wilds and Disco Elysium that I played this year. Obviously, Hollow Knight, which, you know, is still in my bones just now as this incredible experience.
It never leaves, Lewis.
No,
it never
I
leaves.
think it will. And then also some smaller indie games like Katana Zero that I really liked at the start of the year. A mobile game like Card of Darkness that we both played a hell of a lot of.
Yeah, that was that was a great game. Yeah, that was really good.
That's the thing that I want to take away from 2020. Try and forget all the horror and the darkness and just be like, this year I cleared some back catalogue. I discovered some fucking brilliant games, particularly smaller games. I had an absolutely astonishing time in the summer with the Last of Us series. And yeah, I'm looking forward to clearing a few more games over Christmas, probably. I think that's going to be my plan because, like you, I was sort of intending to play Cyberpunk just now and I'm not going to. So it's just going to be a few more of those games that I've been meaning to get to. And that is going to have made for a fucking good year of games, Mark.
Yeah, man, I think you've done really, really well this year, like quite genuinely. And I know that it has been helped by the fact that you have more time. I know it's a bleak reason why you have more time, but nonetheless, you have more time to spend playing games. I must admit, I have done some clearing of the back catalogue as well this year. I've played all 4 Uncharted games, which I'd never played before, which is, of course, the challenge you set me from the DICE Awards last year. I also played Doom 2016 on the lead up into Doom Eternal, which is 2 games that I've not even mentioned that were absolutely incredible. Like they were so incredibly good. But listen, the game honestly that stands out most to me, maybe more than The Last of Us, and if it's not, then it's very, very close, is Bloodborne. My God, I have fallen in love hard with that game. I really, really have. I must have spent 90 plus hours in it, really. It was a long, long time that I spent with that game, and I enjoyed every single moment of it, frankly. But also, it's been a year of strong PlayStation exclusives for me as well. I mean, my top 4 games that I've played this year could easily be Final Fantasy VII Remake, The Last of Us Part 2, Ghost of Tsushima, and Bloodborne, you know?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Probably
closely followed by Demon's Souls Remake and Astro's Playroom. But I suppose one of the games that I wanted to just mention that neither of us have played this year, but I think is probably underrated because I don't think that a lot of people will have probably played this game, and that is Half-Life Alyx.
Of
and
course.
I think that in its field, that game has done incredible things and has truly set a benchmark that I'm not sure many other people are going to be able to reach in the near future. But my God, that game looks absolutely incredible, and I would love to play it if I didn't have to spend thousands of pounds on equipment to do so. But Lewis, I might remember this year most for actually giving myself a break from video games, which I know sounds like heresy to some people, but actually I felt as though I was getting a bit of fatigue, particularly because we do this podcast. I felt as though I was going from game to game to game to game to game to game. Big, huge, intense experience, back to back to back, even running into some of these indie games, which can be quite emotionally weighty, some of them, you know what I mean? And it just felt like a lot. And in actual fact, I found that if I just give myself a little break after one of those experiences that are draining, do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how else to describe it other than saying that. Like, you finish a game, like, for me it was Bloodborne, and it was like, that was 90 hours of my life, and I've just finished it now.
Yeah.
Like, I've just finished that, and that is such a odd sensation. And then to just pile another game on top of that immediately isn't always the most fun thing to do. Do you know what I mean? It almost feels as though you're obligated to move on to the next thing as fast as possible rather than playing that when you actually want to play it. And I just feel that taking a couple of days, taking a week sometimes, and just being energized and being ready to jump into that next game. And I can't remember what I moved to after Bloodborne, but say it was Doom Eternal. It wasn't, but say that it was. Being absolutely energized to jump into that and be like, yes, I am 100% ready to now play Doom Eternal. I've got all that Bloodborne nonsense out of my head now, and I am fully ready to experience this next game. I really think that has been a super healthy find for me, quite frankly.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree more with that, Mark. I think giving yourself space to enjoy this as a hobby and as a thing that you enjoy doing and not like a job. I'm not just saying that to you, I'm saying that to listeners as well. Like, it is easy to get caught up in these hype cycles and in these conversations where you think, oh, I've got to play everything and I've got to play it right away and I've got to spend the money on it on day one. That it can really, I think, hamper your enjoyment of this as a thing that you like doing in your life and that you draw enjoyment from. And so,
Absolutely.
taking those breaks, man, I think was such a good thing for you to have done. I've done it a little bit, but I've also, I've kind of gone the opposite way where I've inserted games where I would normally be taking breaks. And so it's about finding what you were saying there, like those moments where you actually want to be playing something and you're going to enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I think that is a big takeaway from 2020 for me, because I think that it could have got quite bad for me this year, just because, again, everyone has slightly more time, and I could have just been working, then playing video games all night, and then going to bed, then getting up and working, then playing video games all night, and then going to bed. And I did do some of that, to be completely honest with you, but just acknowledging within yourself, no, maybe not today. Do you know what I mean? Maybe it's not the healthiest thing for me to be doing this right now. Maybe I'm playing this game right now out of obligation to either this podcast, if it's for me, or just because you want to be part of that hype. Do you know what I mean? And you're not playing it when you want to actually experience it and enjoy it and are ready for that, like mentally, I suppose, you know. And that has been a big takeaway from this year for me specifically. And I'm just thinking, yeah, I want to be playing video games when I want to play video games. I don't want to be playing video games when I feel obligated to play video games, you know.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, hopefully a bit of rest and relaxation over the Christmas break. You'll be raring for some more games again next year.
Ha! Rest over Christmas, Lewis. Do not make me laugh.
I'm clinging to it, man.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we will have to call it a day there. I'd like to remind you that you can find PlayersToo on all the social media. That's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com. That's PlayerStoo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, it really, really helps us out. I know I say this twice a week, every week, but it genuinely does not become less important on a weekly basis. Thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. Whether you've given us a review or just 5 stars or whatever, just thank you so, so much. It genuinely does mean a lot. I'd like to remind everyone that our play-along game for this month is Return of the Obra Dinn. As I said, I will be getting stuck into this in the next couple of days. Demon Souls is out the way, Lewis. The way is clear, and I can get stuck into Return of the Obra Dinn, which is something that I've been looking forward to for a very long time.
I think it's great that you're getting to play that while you're off work as well. And when it's dark and cold out, it just has the right atmosphere for all of that. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say about it.
Nice one, man. And I would just like to let everyone know that this will be our last podcast of the year, Lewis. So, Merry Christmas to everyone, I guess, and a Happy New Year when it comes, and we will definitely be back in the new year talking video games and doing all the usual stuff that we usually do.
Absolutely, yeah. Happy New Year. Hope it's a better one for everyone, and we'll see you then, yeah?
All right, ladies and gentlemen. See you in the new year.
Thanks.